Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? We turn our gaze now toward the ancient lands, where the sun beats down upon sandstone cliffs and secrets are whispered on the winds of time. We shall speak tonight of a city hidden from the world, a jewel carved not merely of stone, but of silence and profound human ingenuity. The rose-red city called Rockmu, known to many now as Petra. The journey to this hidden kingdom begins not across wide plains, but through a deep chasm, a narrow wound in the earth known across the centuries as the Sick. This winding path, guarded by towering walls of russet and ochre, stretches for miles, deliberately obscuring the treasures it protects, testing the patience and commitment of those who seek entrance into the heart of the Nabatean realm. The sheer, intimidating scale of the rock face forces one to look continually upward, humbling the traveler long before they ever reach the city's heart, reminding them that they tread upon a place sculpted by geological forces far greater and more ancient than any passing human empire. It is a slow, deliberate march through cool, shadowed air, a necessary transition from the chaotic, open world outside to a sacred, internalized space held securely within the mountain's enduring embrace. The brilliant people who conceived and built this wonder were the Nabateans, desert dwellers who mastered the element most essential and most elusive in their arid domain, water. They were not merely resourceful merchants who grew unimaginably wealthy trading frankincense, myrrh, and spices between the distant lands of Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world. They were in fact hydraulic engineers of staggering genius, meticulously carving cisterns, dams, and complex aqueducts into the very structure of the living rock to capture and channel every precious drop of the scarce seasonal rain. This unparalleled mastery of scarcity allowed their civilization to flourish robustly where neighboring empires often struggled and starved, ultimately transforming a seemingly barren, difficult valley into a vital, verdant hub of international culture and tireless commerce, sustained entirely by foresight and ingenuity rather than simple geographical fortune. Their unwavering dedication to the practical management of the life-giving stream was itself a form of profound devotion, recognizing the sacred and binding contract between humankind and the sustaining, nourishing land. After the long, shadowed journey through the deepening Sick, when the traveler is convinced the passage will never end, the path takes one final, sharp turn, and suddenly, the eye is seized by a vision of impossible and breathtaking beauty. The majestic facade of Al-Khazna, universally known as the Treasury. Carved directly out of the smooth, rose-red cliff face, this colossal monumental structure appears to gracefully emerge from the stone, rather than being constructed and built upon it, glowing softly and warmly in the sudden, unexpected burst of dazzling sunlight that illuminates the small, protected clearing. Its soaring columns and intricate carvings speak eloquently of profound Hellenistic influence, mixed subtly with the unique, grounded desert spirit of the Nabateans, a lasting testament to a sophisticated civilization that enthusiastically absorbed the world's knowledge, while remaining fiercely and beautifully true to its own mountainous, resilient identity. The sudden, glorious sight is so overwhelming and unexpected that weary travelers often instinctively fall silent, recognizing in that powerful moment that they stand before a masterpiece intended not merely for the temporary observation of the living, but perhaps primarily designed for the eternal veneration of the gods themselves. Though the structure was later called the Treasury by subsequent nomadic desert tribes who vividly imagined secret caches of gold and jewels hidden safely within the great urn perched atop its highest peak, Al-Khazna was primarily designed as a grand and imposing mausoleum, intended to serve as the distinguished resting place for a powerful Nabatean king or a beloved member of the royal family. These elaborate tombs were conceived not as enduring monuments of human sadness or earthly loss, but rather as sacred thresholds, carefully designed to facilitate the soul's successful passage into the next unseen life. thereby ensuring that the memory, legacy, and lineage of the deceased remain strong and dynamically influential in the collective minds of the succeeding generations of the people. The Nabateans believed with deep certainty in the fundamental continuity of existence, marking their entire landscape with expressions of permanence, thus ensuring that their respected dead were lodged securely and forever within the eternal, unchanging, and protective fabric of the mountain itself. This profound and unwavering reverence for the wisdom of their ancestry formed the very bedrock of their entire highly structured society, anchoring their ephemeral and constantly shifting trade routes in everlasting, immutable stone. Beyond the bustling city floor and the theatrical display of the main street, the spiritual heart of Petra ascended steeply to the high place of sacrifice, a strenuous and dedicated climb leading up to a large, flat plateau atop the prominent peak known as Jebel al-Madbah. Here, far above the echoing bustle of the crowded markets, the quiet murmur of the tombs, and the relative cool shadows of the canyons, the priests would perform their most solemn and essential rituals, perhaps offering libations of wine, or burning precious incense, or presenting animal sacrifice to Dushara, the principal Nabatean male deity, who was often symbolized simply by an unadorned, sacred black stone known as a bayetel. The sheer physical and mental effort required to reach this sacred height emphasized the seriousness and commitment of the worshipper, elevating them physically and spiritually above the temporary concerns of the mundane world below, theoretically granting a clearer, unmediated, and purer connection with the vast, distant heavens and the silent, overwhelming desert cosmos. The very stones here are still visibly imbued with the enduring memory of ceremonial fire, the quiet smoke of prayer, and the sharp scent of sacrifice, standing as ancient witnesses to the deep, silent yearning of a resilient people reaching out toward the transcendent infinite. Further still, deep into the winding canyon labyrinths and requiring a significant, arduous journey, lies Adair, often mistakenly called the monastery by early explorers, a truly colossal edifice that dwarfs even the impressive scale of the treasury, demanding an ascent of many hundreds of meticulously carved steps hammered into the rugged rock face. Its sheer architectural scale is breathtaking and humbling, powerfully reflecting a civilization capable of sustaining massive, precise, and long-term construction projects in the most challenging and unforgiving natural terrain, proving definitively that their enduring commitment to monumental architecture extended far beyond the visible boundaries of the immediate city center. To stand patiently before Adair is to feel the full, magnificent weight of Nabatean ambition, a powerful, unspoken declaration in stone that even the grandest and most imposing desert mountains could be successfully shaped to reflect the spiritual power and the immense earthly wealth accumulated over countless centuries of tireless commerce and exacting control. This remote and utterly silent sanctuary served as a potent, indelible declaration of permanent human presence, carved impossibly high above the rest of the world, seemingly challenging the very clouds themselves with its lofty, ornate presence. Yet, despite the inherent permanence of the stone from which it was carved, the vibrant, ceaseless life that once pulsed energetically through the channels and corridors of Petra eventually faded, muffled and diminished by the inevitable and ceaseless movements of global history and the shifting, unpredictable sands of international trade. Roman influence grew steadily across the region, eventually transforming the Nabatean independent kingdom into merely a sprawling Roman province, and though the magnificent city continued to thrive economically for a considerable period, a truly devastating, catastrophic earthquake in the 4th century weakened its vital infrastructure and disastrously diverted the crucial maritime and desert trade routes upon which its wealth depended. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the thousands of inhabitants departed, not in sudden panic or flight, but in a gradual, relentless, and inexorable retreat, leaving the towering, ornate facades to stand as silent, enigmatic guardians over a dwindling, increasingly isolated population. The great halls and royal tombs, once echoing vibrantly with the loud, purposeful sounds of caravanners, merchants, and priests, eventually became silent chambers of only quiet, mournful wind, holding nothing but the fading memory of their former glory. Centuries passed, and the knowledge of the city's complex location retreated into the deepest folds of local folklore, its existence becoming a guarded secret known only to the Bedou of the immediate region, who treated the majestic ruins with a mix of awe, respect, and deep superstitious caution. The world outside, the great capitals of Rome and Byzantium, forgot the name Rakhmu, dismissing the notion of a magnificent city carved entirely of stone as an extravagant myth told by desert wanderers, thereby allowing the Great Canyons to slip back into an undisturbed and perfect silence. This long period of seclusion was, in its own way, a final, necessary protection, guarding the delicate carvings and the massive structures from the aggressive hands of later builders and the relentless damage inflicted by the very armies that had once marched through its sick. The city slept, patiently awaiting a time when human curiosity would once more pierce the veil of the vast, shifting desert. It was a lone Swiss explorer, Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, traveling under a disguised identity and driven by an insatiable hunger for ancient geographical knowledge, who rediscovered Petra in the early years of the 19th century, guided by whispers and vague, hesitant promises of a lost city. He approached the location under the guise of wanting to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of Aaron, a clever pretext that allowed him access to the sacred valleys that the local tribes fiercely protected from European intrusion. When he finally stood before the Kazne, the sheer force of its silent, enduring presence confirmed that the legendary city was real, a testament to a forgotten people who had perfected the art of carving their history directly into the very skeleton of the earth. His report, delivered carefully back to the distant, astonished world, lifted Petra from the dust of legend and cemented its place forever in the recognized history of monumental human achievement. Yet, even now, with the knowledge of its existence shared widely, Petra remains a city steeped in profound mystery, revealing its secrets only slowly and reluctantly to the patient scholar and the respectful visitor. It is estimated that only a small fraction of the ancient city has been fully excavated and studied, suggesting that countless temples, residential areas, and unknown royal tombs still lie buried beneath the accumulated centuries of sand and earth, waiting quietly for the gentle shovel to reveal their complex geometry and their stories. The mountains continue to hold their secrets tightly, whispering only hints of the Nabatean kings, Aretas, Obotus, and Malachus, who reigned supreme over the vital trade crossroads, orchestrating an immense flow of wealth that linked 3 continents and defined the economy of the ancient world for hundreds of prosperous years. The silence holds the key to the unwritten chapters of a history carved in red stone. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The Nabateans, masters of the desolate land, understood that power in the arid wilderness was not measured merely in armies or gold, but in the careful governance of water, the very breath of the desert. They engineered a system so sophisticated that it stands unrivaled in the ancient world, capturing every precious drop of rain that fell upon the high peaks, channeling it through miles of carefully carved conduits and tunnels that ran both high upon the cliffs and secretly beneath the main thoroughfares of the city. These hidden lifelines fed hundreds of vast subterranean cisterns, meticulously sealed against evaporation, allowing Petra to sustain a thriving population, its vast caravans, and its luxurious gardens, even during the harshest and longest dry seasons. This mastery of hydrological control ensured not only the survival of the city, but also its independence, making it an indispensable, secure stop for all merchants daring enough to traverse the sprawling deserts. The silence holds the key to the unwritten chapters of a history carved in red stone. It was upon these secure foundations of stored water that the glorious edifice of Nabatean wealth was built, turning a remote desert canyon into the most crucial junction of the global trade network. Caravans arrived weekly, burdened by the slow, rhythmic steps of hundreds of camels carrying frankincense and myrrh from the southern regions of Arabia, precious aromatic resins that were prized above all else for temple rites and funerary pyres across Rome and Greece. Alongside these sacred cargoes came the exotic spices of the Orient, cinnamon, pepper, and cloves, traveling westwards, mingling their powerful scents with the fine silk threads arriving from the distant reaches of Cathay and the priceless pearls harvested from the deep waters of the Gulf. The city became a vibrant, multi-tongued nexus where Greek, Aramaic, Latin, and Nabatean scripts were exchanged as freely as the coinage, forging a unique cosmopolitan identity defined by tolerance and shrewd mercantile wisdom. To approach Petra during its height was an experience designed not just for practical defense, but for the profound psychological impact it held upon the arriving traveler. One had to enter through the Great Sick, a narrow fissure in the sandstone mountains that stretches over a mile in length, where the sheer, towering walls rise hundreds of feet overhead, barely allowing the midday sun to pierce the darkness below. As the camels padded softly on the ancient stone pavement, the canyon would twist and turn, hiding the destination completely, creating a rising tension that held the merchant captive between the imposing cliffs. Only the echoing sounds of the caravan's hoofbeats and the muffled voices of the guards broke the hushed solemnity of the passage, a dramatic architectural prelude deliberately crafted to prepare the visitor for the sudden, breathtaking revelation awaiting them. And then, after that long, deliberate walk in the shadowed gorge, the walls would finally part, abruptly revealing the sublime spectacle of the Khazna, the treasury, blazing red and golden in the sudden sunlight. This magnificent facade, carved with unimaginable precision into the living rock face, stands as the most eloquent testament to the fusion of cultures that defined Nabatean art, displaying the refined columns and intricate friezes adopted from the Hellenistic world, yet rooted firmly in the mountainous soil of Arabia. Though it is often called the treasury, this monumental structure was almost certainly built as the resting place for a powerful Nabatean king, perhaps Aretas IV, a king whose ambition stretched his influence far beyond the immediate confines of the city, intending this enduring tomb to serve as a perpetual symbol of the kingdom's prosperity and immortal connection to the earth itself. The detailed carvings of gods and goddesses, eagles, and Amazonian figures all silently proclaim the sophisticated tastes and the theological depth of the royalty buried within. Yet Petra was far more than just a staging post for commerce or a repository for royal remains. It was a vibrant city where the mundane rhythm of daily life pulsed alongside fervent spiritual devotion. High above the valley floor, reached by steep, exhausting staircases carved into the very stone, lay the high places of sacrifice, massive, open-air altars where the populace gathered for solemn rituals dedicated to their primary deity, Dushara, the Lord of the Mountain. This powerful god, often represented simply by a smooth, unadorned black stone, symbolized the essential power and protective mystery of the jagged landscape that surrounded and shielded the city from prying eyes. These sacred summits offered the priests a clear, unbroken connection to the heavens, reinforcing the belief that the Nabateans were a chosen people, favored by the mountain gods who provided the rain and protected the fragile routes of trade. The deep reverence for the divine extended into the very residential architecture of the city, where homes and dwellings were skillfully carved into the lower slopes and sometimes built from stones cut directly from the surrounding amphitheater. Even the simplest Nabatean home possessed a sense of permanence and cool, quiet refuge from the desert heat, reflecting a society that valued stability and domestic order alongside the adventurous spirit of the merchant. Life was regulated by the arrival and departure of the great caravans, yet punctuated by the ancient rituals that bound the community to the land, including feasts and processions that utilized the massive, purpose-built theater, capable of seating thousands, its tiers of seats hewn directly from the rose-red rock face. The constant movement of foreign traders ensured a continuous influx of ideas and customs, which the Nabateans absorbed and recast through their own unique desert lens, maintaining their distinct identity even while welcoming the world. The legacy of their craftsmanship is not confined merely to the grand facades, but visible in the meticulous detail of the street of facades, where smaller yet equally intricate tombs line the thoroughfare leading toward the heart of the city, displaying a remarkable uniformity of skill passed down through generations of stonemasons. Each tomb, whether grand or modest, served as a perpetual signpost of family honor and deep commitment to the ancestors, ensuring that the deceased remained an active, if silent, participant in the ongoing life of the community. These quiet resting places, situated alongside the living and the working, illustrate a profound unity between the earthly existence and the spiritual realm, a belief system integrated completely into the physical topography of Petra. Despite their ingenious defenses and their immense prosperity, the fate of Petra, like all great empires built upon fluctuating trade, was inevitably tied to the whims of larger geopolitical forces and the unpredictable shifting of global commerce. As the centuries turned, the powerful Roman Empire began to consolidate its eastern provinces, eventually redirecting many of the traditional spice and silk routes northward towards emerging cities like Palmyra, which offered alternative and sometimes more secure paths to the Mediterranean ports. This economic divergence did not bring about a sudden, violent end to Petra, but rather a slow, deliberate erosion of its vital necessity. The steady flow of gold began to thin, the great caravans became less frequent, and the echoes in the sick grew fewer and farther between. The city, though never truly abandoned, slipped gradually from its position as the world's commercial capital into a quiet, enduring provincial hub under the administrative gaze of Rome, its magnificent carved monuments slowly being reclaimed by the relentless, patient desert sands. The great stone facades, having witnessed the arrival of countless merchants and monarchs, began their long vigil, holding the silence of a forgotten era. Even after the official Roman annexation in the early 2nd century of the Common Era, Petra continued to exist, maintaining a certain regional importance due to its sheer structural permanence, surviving earthquakes and the rise of new faiths. The Romans, recognizing the strategic value of the massive rock-carved infrastructure, simply adapted it to their own uses, adding colonnaded streets and monumental gates that speak of their imperial desire to stamp their authority upon every significant place. However, the essence of Nabatean independence, that vital spark fueled by water and trade, slowly dissipated, leaving behind the husks of former glory, now framed by the slightly clumsy additions of the new rulers, marking the melancholy transition from vibrant independent kingdom to administered territory. The spirit of the place became less about the bold merchant controlling destiny and more about the stoic endurance of stone against the inevitable march of time. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? Though the Romans brought their legions and their standardized roads, their presence also signaled the slow, inevitable decline of Petra's unique strategic advantage. For the trade currents of the world are like desert rivers, prone to shifting course when the terrain changes or a new path proves easier. The wealth that had flowed through the narrow sick like lifeblood began to thin, drawn away by the burgeoning efficiency of sea travel along the Egyptian coast and the establishment of more direct land routes further north, leaving the Nabatean sandstone channels feeling less like arteries of commerce and more like the silent, sun-baked canyons they truly were. As the great spice caravans grew shorter and less frequent, the specialized knowledge of the Nabatean water engineers, once the envy of kings, became slightly less vital, and the elaborate mechanisms for life in the arid land began their long, slow drift toward disrepair, unnoticed by the imperial administrators focused on grander, distant affairs. The population that remained within the valley walls changed, exchanging the sharp entrepreneurial zeal of the spice merchant for the quieter, stoic patience of the farmer and the local administrator. Watching the magnificent facades transition from thriving offices of exchange to mere monuments of a powerful past. The people still carved and built, but their focus was now on maintenance and utility rather than flamboyant display, adapting the grand burial chambers into modest dwellings or storage spaces, inadvertently preserving the artistry by turning the sacred into the intensely practical. The wind, which had once carried the excited chatter of 1,000 languages from Syria, Arabia, and the Mediterranean shores, now bore only the low whistle over the treasury's cornice and the distant cry of a shepherd guiding his flock across the silent, expansive floor of the former market square, now mostly barren earth. It was not the gradual shift in economy that struck the final, decisive blow to the city's heart, but the tremor of the earth itself, an unpredictable force unleashed in the mid-4th century, shaking the very foundations of the red mountains that protected the valley and striking a heavy blow in the year 363 of the Common Era. The great quakes fractured the delicate network of cisterns and ceramic pipes that had defined Petra's very existence, shattering the perfect balance between human ingenuity and natural scarcity, a catastrophic failure from which the fragile infrastructure could never fully recover under the diminished resources of the late Roman world. While the massive rock-cut tombs stood firm against the violence, many of the freestanding colonnades and essential public buildings collapsed into ruins, and the vital flow of water, the true secret source of Nabatean power, became inconsistent and difficult to capture, irrevocably altering the sustainable capacity of the settlement. While the massive rock-cut tombs stood firm against the violence, many of the freestanding colonnades and essential public buildings collapsed into ruins, and the vital flow of water, the true secret source of Nabatean power, became inconsistent and difficult to capture, irrevocably altering the sustainable capacity of the settlement. In the wake of this destruction and the shifting tides of the wider empire, a new spiritual urgency took root, fueled by the official embrace of Christianity by Constantinople, transforming the remnants of Petra into an important, if isolated, Byzantine ecclesiastical center. Where once the gods Dushara and Alad were honored in open-air sanctuaries, now the sign of the cross was etched into the very sandstone, and the magnificent urn tomb, one of the grandest structures overlooking the valley, was consecrated and adapted into a cathedral, its vast vaulted chamber serving as a place of Christian worship, replacing the solemn rites of burial with the joyous hymns of the new faith. Monks and hermits sought refuge in the quietude of the high places, inhabiting caves once reserved for the dead, their contemplative silence replacing the noisy fervor of the marketplace, seeing in the enduring stone monuments a testament not to human wealth but to the timelessness of the divine creation. Yet, even this new religious importance could not arrest the fundamental physical decay and demographic shrinkage, as the maintenance of the vast, damaged infrastructure proved too great a burden for the diminished community, prompting a steady retreat from the sprawling outer edges of the city. The great theater, once filled with thousands, now served as an occasional quarry for building stones, and the magnificent royal tombs stood ever more isolated, surrounded by silence and the creeping encroachment of wind-blown sand, their detailed carvings softened by the slow, gentle abrasion of millennia. Petra, no longer the sprawling metropolitan hub, contracted inwardly, becoming a small, self-contained village nestled near the Temple of the Winged Lions and the central administrative area. A testament to endurance, but a shadow of the vibrant glory it once possessed under its independent kings. As the 6th century faded into the 7th, the external world was once again remade, for the great Islamic armies swept through the Levant, establishing a new political and religious order that shifted the geopolitical focus entirely toward Damascus and further north. Petra, already marginalized and physically diminished, passed almost entirely out of the grand historical narrative. It was not conquered in a fierce battle, but simply bypassed and forgotten by the centers of new power. Its remaining inhabitants left in peaceful isolation, maintaining a quiet, agricultural existence dependent entirely on local resources and local knowledge. The final act of withdrawal saw the last Byzantine bishops and external administrators depart, leaving the monumental canyon city to the solitary stewardship of the local Bedouin tribes, who knew its secrets intimately and treated its vast empty chambers as shelters and sacred spaces. This silence, this complete withdrawal from the mapped world, ultimately became Petra's greatest salvation, protecting its magnificent sculptures and structures from the widespread pillaging and destruction that befell so many other prominent cities of antiquity throughout the turbulent centuries that followed. For the next 1,000 years, the great silent city of stone existed in profound obscurity, a whisper of a forgotten civilization held only in the oral traditions of the local inhabitants, who guarded its entrance with fierce loyalty and a deep respect born of generations living amongst the spirits of the rock-cut tombs. The Sikh, the majestic entrance, became not a welcoming gateway for global commerce, but a heavily guarded secret path, ensuring its silent survival until the very edge of the modern era, holding the breath of the Nabatean dream deep within the enduring red rock. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The 1,000 years of silence that blanketed Petra were a long, enduring slumber, yet the world outside, though forgetful, still retained faint ghost images of a great metropolis lost beneath the sands of Arabia. Cartographers and philosophers, poring over ancient manuscripts from Roman and Byzantine libraries, would occasionally trace the faded name of Rakhmu, recognizing it as a nexus of ancient commerce, a powerful kingdom that had vanished from the memory of kings, but whose stone monuments were said to defy time itself. These lingering legends, often dismissed as travelers' fancy or poetic exaggeration, provided a thin, persistent thread of curiosity that ultimately guided the most determined souls across the treacherous and forbidden landscape, seeking to bridge the chasm between rumor and reality. It was near the twilight of the European Age of Enlightenment, when the pursuit of historical truth and geographical conquest reached its fever pitch, that one such soul dedicated himself entirely to unraveling this enduring mystery. This man, a scholar of deep resolve and profound linguistic skill named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, understood that access to such an intensely guarded secret could not be achieved through force or declaration, but only through profound camouflage and cunning reverence. He spent years mastering the intricate dialects and customs of the desert peoples, adopting the persona of a humble sheikh Ibrahim from Aleppo, a seeker of sacred knowledge, journeying not for antiquarian greed, but for pious devotion. In the year of our Lord 1812, having gained the necessary trust of the local guides near the desolate Wadi Musa, he announced his fervent desire to make a sacrifice at the tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses, whose resting place was rumored to lie high upon the mountain peak overlooking the Lost Valley. His true, thrilling intent lay not with the prophet's grave, but with the necessity of passing through the narrow, twisting entrance to the fabled city that lay hidden beneath the very path to the sacred mount. This pilgrimage became his calculated deception, providing the only conceivable pretext to compel the desert tribesmen to lead an outsider into the sacred, secretive heart of their guarded territory. As his guide finally led him to the mouth of the canyon, the towering walls of fractured sandstone rising hundreds of feet overhead, the traveler felt the immense gravity of the moment, realizing he was perhaps the first European to knowingly approach this entrance in over a millennium. The narrow gorge carved by wind and water tightened around him, a majestic, winding spine of rock where the daylight struggled to penetrate, shrouding the path in a perpetual, cool twilight. The sounds of the desert faded away, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to carry the ancient echoes of Nabatean commerce and the whispers of forgotten deities, lending the very atmosphere and intensity that spoke of true, undisturbed antiquity. He moved slowly, deliberately, down the winding path, pretending to focus his attention entirely on the religious journey. Yet every nerve ending was acutely aware of the rock-cut channels, the remnants of ancient paving stones, and the subtle traces of engineering genius that lined the shadowed passage. The air grew heavy with anticipation, thick with the dry scent of sun-baked stone and the memory of carved hands, as the path twisted and turned, hiding its treasure until the very last moment. He walked not just down a canyon, but through a monumental portal of time, shedding the modernity of his own era with every footstep deeper into the monumental past. Then, through a sudden, final fissure in the rock face, framed perfectly by the towering walls of the canyon, the overwhelming vision appeared, blinding in its unexpected beauty. The radiant facade of Al-Khazna, the famed treasury. The morning sun, catching the rosy pink hue of the immense sculpted sandstone, illuminated the intricate detail of the Hellenistic columns and statues carved entirely out of the living rock. The sight was so sudden and so sublime that the great traveler, though rigorously disciplined and practiced in stoicism, almost betrayed his true purpose, feeling the collective weight of 1,000 years of solitude burst upon him in that single astonishing image. His heart, he later wrote in his secret notes, almost failed him for joy and wonder, yet he had to feign a studied indifference, focusing instead on his prayer beads and the direction of the mountain peak. The local men were watchful and deeply suspicious, keen to ensure their outsider did not linger or attempt to commit any sacrilege against the spirits of the place they had guarded so jealously. Burckhardt dared only to glance at the magnificent carvings and the vastness of the empty plaza, making swift mental observations and concealing a few hasty sketches deep within his travel-worn robes, knowing his time in this sacred valley would be brutally short. Upon his return to the mapped world, the traveler was quickly consumed by the fever of the tropics and sadly perished shortly thereafter. But his detailed journals and letters were carefully preserved and ultimately published, sending a seismic shockwave through the scholarly institutions of Europe. The accounts confirmed the long-lost existence of a Nabatean capital, a stupendous city of the dead, carved entirely from the red rock, a legend confirmed by a single, determined witness. Petra instantly transitioned from a phantom of history to a tangible geographical goal, setting off a new age of determined and often aggressive exploration. This revelation marked the end of Petra's protected seclusion, though not its immediate conquest, for the journey remained highly perilous, and the local inhabitants now understood precisely the nature of the treasure they guarded. The next few decades saw a tense, intermittent trickle of European explorers, adventurers, and artists attempting to reach the rose-red city, each one having to negotiate treacherous alliances, face outright hostility, and battle the profound physical difficulties of the unforgiving terrain. The silence of the 1,000 years was beginning to crack, replaced by the sound of approaching boots and the slow, inevitable encroachment of the world that had forgotten and now desperately longed to reclaim its lost past. The desert tribes, having witnessed the sudden, hungry curiosity of these outsiders, deepened their resolve, treating every traveler not just as an intruder, but as a threat to the equilibrium that had maintained their ancestral home for so long. They controlled the essential water sources, the grazing land, and, most crucially, the narrow, defensible passage of the sick, forcing the early waves of visitors to pay dearly, often with their security and sometimes with their lives, for the briefest glimpse of the monumental tombs. The era of pure solitude was over, replaced by a fraught period of tension between protection and global recognition, a struggle between the spirits of the rock and the relentless pull of the outer world. Yet it was these very early, difficult accounts, penned by the handful of successful infiltrators, men who braved the threats to stand before the Cosme and the monastery, that cemented Petra's place in the global imagination. They described not just carvings, but a profound architectural statement, a testament to a culture that mastered its environment by turning mountain into mansion and chasm into commercial highway. These descriptions painted the stone city as a profound symbol of resilience, a kingdom hidden and preserved by the very forces of nature and the loyalty of its subsequent guardians, awaiting its full telling upon the world stage. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The detailed maps and sketches created by the earliest successful visitors initiated a fever in the academic centers of Europe, swiftly turning the isolated curiosity into a true scholarly obsession. Scholars in London, Paris, and Berlin debated the intricacies of Nabatean deities and the sophisticated mechanics of their trade routes, realizing that Petra was not merely a decorative tomb site, but the meticulously engineered heart of a vast, complex network that had spanned continents, linking the incense trails to the spice markets of Rome. The myth of the hidden city began its slow but certain transformation into the complex academic puzzle of the lost civilization, a challenge demanding organized resources and large expeditions far beyond the solitary wanderings of the first few explorers. The intellectual excitement centered on understanding how such a powerful, urban kingdom could simply vanish from the scrolls of historical memory, preserved only by the desert sands and the formidable loyalties of its local custodians. This new wave of exploration saw teams arrive not with simple sketchbooks, but burdened with heavy surveyor's tools, fragile camera equipment requiring shaded processing tents, and the significant financial backing of wealthy benefactors or powerful national societies, marking a decisive shift from mere observation to rigorous scientific documentation. They faced the same relentless heat, the sudden chilling winds, and the ever-present scrutiny of the local tribes. But they brought with them a different kind of conviction, the belief that their meticulous, systematic European understanding of history gave them the inherent right to measure, classify, and ultimately claim the definitive narrative of the ancient stonecutters. These researchers sought not just beauty or inspiration, but quantifiable data, decipherable inscriptions, carefully dated pottery shards, and precise architectural measurements that could prove their carefully constructed theories about the city's sudden rise to prominence and its subsequent mysterious decline from the center stage of ancient history. These researchers sought not just beauty or inspiration, but quantifiable data, decipherable inscriptions, carefully dated pottery shards, and precise architectural measurements that could prove their carefully constructed theories about the city's sudden rise to prominence and its subsequent mysterious decline from the center stage of ancient history. The tension between the locals and the newcomers escalated sharply as these foreign teams began to systematically excavate and unearth objects from deep within the sand, artifacts that the desert guardians considered sacred extensions of the earth itself and not mere museum pieces destined for distant display. Skirmishes erupted not over the fabled gold that many still believed lay hidden within the treasury walls, but over fragments of carved stone and fragile clay tablets, with the desert folk understanding instinctively that once an object left the sheltering valley, a piece of the city's soul departed with it, thereby severing the essential link between the living guardians and the silent ancestors. This conflict introduced a profound moral question into the quiet valley. Who held the true, authoritative right to interpret the history whispered within the rock? Those whose bloodlines had cooled in the surrounding sands for countless generations, or those who arrived with sophisticated academic theories written in distant, comfortable libraries? Yet, despite the continuous cultural conflicts and the sometimes dangerous competition between rival academic teams, the sustained presence of the researchers did begin to illuminate the profound and astonishing ingenuity of the Nabateans, particularly their unparalleled mastery over the precious element of water. The explorers stood in awe of the sophisticated hydroengineering, marveling at the hidden channels carved high into the canyon walls, the deep cisterns sealed meticulously against evaporation, and the monumental dams constructed to tame the sudden, violent flash floods that occasionally scourged the landscape with devastating speed. This realization proved that Petra's survival and its ability to flourish as a powerful trade nexus were built entirely upon hydrological brilliance and patient planning rather than miraculous luck, revealing that the true, enduring wealth of the city lay not in exotic silks or imported gems, but in controlled, flowing streams. As the excavators meticulously mapped the massive facades, moving their focus beyond the well-documented symmetry of the Kazna, they increasingly recognized the deep spiritual and astronomical meaning embedded within the solid mass of the rock itself. The expansive, detailed tombs were quickly understood to be more than just markers of death. They were carefully designed portals to the afterlife, often deliberately oriented to capture the rising or setting sun at critical celestial moments, blending advanced engineering with sophisticated cosmology in a harmonious way that few other civilizations had ever managed to achieve. The Nabateans, it became clear, had not merely built upon the land in a conventional sense, but had entered into a profound, respectful collaboration with the very mountain, allowing the inherent forms and silent spirits of the sandstone to guide their tools, ensuring that their colossal structures felt eternally rooted, emerging as if lovingly birthed from the earth itself. The Nabateans, it became clear, had not merely built upon the land in a conventional sense, but had entered into a profound, respectful collaboration with the very mountain, allowing the inherent forms and silent spirits of the sandstone to guide their tools, ensuring that their colossal structures felt eternally rooted, emerging as if lovingly birthed from the earth itself. One massive structure, situated high above the main valley floor, often resisted the easy classification of the surveyors and the measuring tapes, the grand, isolated edifice known locally as Ad-Dair, or the monastery. The exhausting, steep climb required to reach this elevated sanctuary became a necessary pilgrimage for every serious traveler, offering not just a breathtaking view of the sprawling city below, but instilling a deeper, immediate sense of the Nabatean desire for retreat, contemplation, and spiritual separation, placing the most sacred acts far above the mercantile clamor of the main market. Standing before its vast, stark, and almost unornamented facade, stripped of the elaborate detailing seen lower down, the observer understood immediately that some parts of Petra were designed purely for transcendent devotion, serving as a monumental altar facing the endless, empty horizon, perpetually reminding the inhabitants that the kingdom's enduring power rested equally on commercial success and unwavering, transcendent belief. Throughout this period of renewed scrutiny, intense geological surveys, and the relentless tapping of archaeologists' picks, the local Bedouins remained the steadfast, enduring, silent guardians, adapting their protective strategies to manage the new, subtle threats of intellectual theft and foreign bureaucratic legislation. They evolved into indispensable guides and suppliers for the expeditions, subtly mastering the specific logistical demands of the outsiders, while meticulously controlling access to the most sensitive, often hidden areas, ensuring that the deepest secrets of the perennial water caches and the high, sacred places remained entirely obscured from the official, numbered maps. Their historical resistance shifted slowly but firmly from outright hostility and ambush to a quieter, more enduring stubbornness, preserving the spirit of the ancient Nabatean isolation by controlling the very pathways of knowledge that the outsiders so desperately sought to acquire. The Stone City was now undeniably and internationally famous, yet that hard-won fame carried a heavy and immediate cost, as the once pristine, hidden paths began quickly to bear the destructive marks of hurried footsteps, careless camping, and often thoughtless excavation. The fragile beauty preserved by centuries of benign neglect was suddenly threatened not by the long-forgotten armies of Rome or the slow erosion of wind, but by the slow, grinding abrasion of well-meaning but often environmentally destructive curiosity, creating an urgent and desperate need for formalized conservation and protection that no single group was yet organized or prepared to lead. Petra, having brilliantly survived the catastrophic fall of empires and the endless, silent march of geological time, found itself entering a new, distinctly precarious phase of existence, struggling desperately to maintain its profound, silent dignity under the constant, overwhelming gaze of the modern world, which professed to love the Stone City but did not yet fully grasp the delicate respect required to maintain its ancient quietude. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? From where do you join us this evening? The global outcry eventually drew the attention of learned societies, who saw in Petra not merely a beautiful ruin, but a monumental puzzle requiring careful, measured protection against both the elements and the increasing human intrusion. These professors and dedicated conservators arrived from distant lands with their precise diagrams, standardized measuring tapes, and calibrated tools, determined to apply the rigorous and systematized standards of European science to the fragile desert stone, believing firmly that only their sophisticated methods could truly halt the inevitable march of geological decay. Yet their deep academic respect for the architectural achievements of the long-dead Nabateans often did not easily extend to the living inhabitants of the region, whom they frequently dismissed as simple, uneducated residents clinging stubbornly to the rock formations and inadvertently complicating the essential work of scholarly preservation. The Bidul, the traditional keepers of the silent city whose ancestors had watched over the sick for centuries, observed this sudden, dramatic flurry of official foreign activity from the shadowed openings of their caves and the secure vantage points of the high cliffs with a seasoned, almost philosophical detachment. They understood keenly, based on long experience and generational observation, that the visiting scientists were only capable of mapping the visible surface, the grand theatrical facades designed millennia ago for public display and ceremonial use, missing the profound infrastructure hidden beneath the sand. They knew, with the certainty of inherited memory, that the secrets of the sophisticated water systems, the true locations of the ancient treasury caches, and the most spiritually charged altars lay far beyond the reach of the newly erected boundary ropes, the intrusive survey stakes, and the busy official notebooks carried by the men in sun helmets. For the true guardians, the protection of Petra was never merely a matter of applied physics or measured surveying, nor was it reducible to the cataloging of broken pottery sherds, but rather it was a deeply spiritual covenant that their people had maintained faithfully with the surrounding land for countless generations. They recognized that the preservation of the city's soul rested primarily upon maintaining the profound silence of the high desert and guarding the intricate pathways of movement, ensuring that the natural harmony of the wadi was not violently disrupted by the sudden, discordant demands of the exterior world. When the foreign teams spoke of arresting decay, the Bedouins thought of the proper way to handle the water runoff during the winter rains, understanding that respecting the environment's rhythm was the only truly enduring form of conservation. The greatest, most persistent challenge facing these earnest conservationists, however, lay not in warding off opportunistic thieves or managing the growing, disruptive streams of curious travelers, but in confronting the very delicate nature of the stone itself, a fragile, porous fabric of cemented quartz grains and oxidized iron that was continuously shedding its integrity. Every tentative attempt to reinforce the collapsing walls or to seal the hairline cracks that spiderwebbed across the grand facades inevitably led to unforeseen complications, as the ancient stone needed constantly to breathe the dry desert air and adjust to the drastic diurnal temperature shifts, often resulting in unintended moisture traps that accelerated the very decay they sought so desperately to prevent. It became swiftly and heartbreakingly clear that no modern human technology, however precise or well-intentioned, could ever truly freeze the silent, inexorable march of geological time, which had carved and scarred the sick long before any transient empire rose or ultimately fell. The profound, heavy silence that had been the city's greatest and most treasured inheritance for more than 1,000 years began slowly and tragically to dissipate, replaced by the persistent, grating sounds of the modern occupation that now punctuated the ancient valley's atmosphere. This new soundscape included the sharp, echoing metallic ring of surveying equipment, the low, irritating hum of portable generators used to power floodlights, and the constant, irreverent, and intrusive chatter of visitors who treated the sacred precinct merely as a transitory backdrop for fleeting amusement. The magnificent treasury, Al-Khazna, which had stood as a powerful sentinel of timeless, undisturbed majesty, was now frequently besieged from the first rays of morning light, becoming a commercialized stage for hurried photographs and instantaneous, superficial admiration, its deep spiritual resonance sadly muted beneath the ceaseless, overwhelming tide of transient human noise. Even the powerful desert wind, when it swept fiercely through the narrow, twisting canyons, seemed to carry a heavy note of melancholic regret, a weary sigh mourning the deep, undisturbed peace that had characterized the ancient Nabatean isolation and the generations of silent Bedouin guardianship. This noise penetrated the deepest clefts of the mountains, disturbing the millennia-long rest of the carved tombs and the silent resting places of the dead, substituting a fleeting, superficial admiration for the profound, deep reverence that the site naturally demanded. The spiritual keepers worried that the constant disturbance would eventually offend the old, powerful desert spirits, drawing down upon the valley a subtle but inevitable retribution for this profound lack of respect shown to the sanctity of the resting place. With the sudden and dramatic influx of international currency and global attention, the long-standing ancient custom of fiercely guarding tribal boundaries, personal anonymity, and the locations of hidden artifacts began a slow, agonizing metamorphosis, subtly shifting the motivations of some of the long-standing resident guardians. The small, precious relics and personal caches, once revered purely as ancestral markers or tools of sacred practice, started inevitably to be viewed through the new, distorting lens of currency, becoming objects that could be exchanged for the temporary comforts and modern necessities that the surrounding world was pressing relentlessly upon them. This psychological transformation introduced a new kind of quiet internal friction and agonizing moral struggle within the scattered Bedouin communities, separating those who held fast to the old ways of spiritual custodianship from those who saw an undeniable, inevitable future intertwined with the relentless mechanics of the market economy and the insatiable, driving demands of the curious traveler. Despite the extensive formal surveys and the creation of meticulously numbered grids intended to catalog every carved niche, every exposed tomb, and every discernible detail of the exposed city, there remained vast, rugged tracts of the surrounding Jebel Mountains that stubbornly resisted inclusion in the official numbered maps. These regions were known only through the intricate, detailed, and entirely verbal histories shared slowly around the evening campfires and passed down through generations of intimate familiarity with the rock. These highest paths, steep, treacherous, and arduous, leading to the secluded plateaus and the most ancient, weather-beaten high places of sacrifice, remained absolutely the undisputed domain of the local inhabitants, who continued to perform their own, unseen acts of devotion and essential guardianship far above the bustling, commercially organized lower city. The local keepers intuitively understood that the true, enduring power of Petra lay not primarily in the magnificent, widely admired facades that the world now came to view, but rather in the uncarved, silent peaks and the sweeping, open desert sky that framed the entire valley with immutable majesty. These were the places where the powerful, silent spirit of the old gods still watched carefully over the hidden valley, places that could never be photographed, mapped, or truly understood by those who came to the valley burdened by notebooks and the ceaseless demands of the modern clock. Their continuing quiet presence ensured that the vital, beating heart of the sacred valley would remain forever elusive and entirely untouchable, a silent resistance against the overwhelming tide of commodification. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The Guardians moved through the high sandstone maze not by etched signposts or numerical coordinates, but by the subtle, ever-shifting language of the intense desert light upon the rock face and the placement of ancient, weather-worn cairns that few outside their tradition ever noticed or even perceived. These humble piles of stone, barely distinguishable from the surrounding scree and appearing merely accidental to the untrained eye, served as a profound, living library, meticulously chronicling the forgotten paths of their most distant ancestors and marking the safe passages across yawning chasms and slick, precipitous slopes. The specialized knowledge required for this meticulous navigation was never written down upon brittle papyrus or carved into formal inscriptions, but was rather etched slowly into the very soul through generations of patient observation and deep reverence for the mountain's unforgiving, magnificent character, ensuring that the highest, most sacred places remained permanently inaccessible to the casual or profane gaze. Down in the crowded valley floor, where the warm scent of baking bread mixed inextricably with the heavy dust kicked up by innumerable sandals and the ceaseless clatter of commerce echoed loudly between the grand, famous facades, the pervasive atmosphere was one of ceaseless, hurried human activity and palpable transactional urgency that defined the great trading metropolis. But ascending these secret, intensely winding trails, leaving the heat and confusion far below, the noise of the lower world soon faded entirely into an indistinct, distant hum, gradually replaced by a profound and immensely enveloping silence, broken only occasionally by the sharp, metallic call of the desert hawk circling patiently in the vast, empty space overhead. This overwhelming quietude of the high peaks was not an absence of sound, but rather a rich, weighty, and immediate presence, the very voice of eternity speaking softly through the warm, cleansing desert wind, meticulously purifying the spirit of the worldly demands and transitory desires left far below. Even the most celebrated engineering marvels of the lower city, the famed aqueducts that channeled the precious, life-giving water from the distant, hidden springs through elaborate systems of terracotta pipes and finely carved channels, relied entirely upon this profound, essential traditional knowledge held only by the keepers of the upper slopes. The keepers knew the precise, critical locations where the vital veins of water began their slow, difficult descent, understanding the subtle and demanding art of carefully coaxing the reluctant moisture from the living rock without ever disturbing the delicate, necessary balance of the desert ecosystem that held it secure. To guard these fragile, often overlooked sources was thus considered an act of supreme piety and essential stewardship, for water was understood not merely as a commodity to be bought and sold swiftly in the marketplace, but as the flowing embodiment of the valley's continuing grace and the oldest, most crucial blessing offered consistently by the arid, demanding land itself. When the fierce desert sun finally dipped entirely beyond the jagged western rim of the mountains, plunging the deep canyon floor into a rapid, profound indigo twilight, the true custodians began their silent, essential rounds of guardianship and watchfulness. Under the immense, sprawling canvas of the unpolluted night sky, where the ancient, primordial stars burned with a fierce, uncompromising clarity utterly unknown to the softer, diffused lights of civilization, they became the living links to the first, long-departed inhabitants and the founding spirits of the valley. They watched patiently over the sleepers below, guarding the hidden entrances to the most sacred, sealed tombs, and ensuring that the deep, necessary stillness of the inner canyon remained entirely undisturbed by any careless or disrespectful hand, their dedicated presence nothing more than quiet shadows moving within the deeper, protective shadows of the towering rock walls. The magnificent, silent stone faces of Petra, carved painstakingly by the ingenious hands of the Nabateans millennia ago, bore silent and eloquent testament to a complex civilization that mastered both ruthless commerce and deep spiritual devotion. Channeling the tremendous wealth derived from the critical spice routes not into fleeting luxury, but into immortal, enduring expressions of their profound faith. Though the formal structure of their powerful kingdom had long dissolved completely into the relentless, absorbing sands of time, vital fragments of their complex language and their deep-seated philosophical understanding of the natural, cyclical world still lingered palpably in the very air of the high passes. These subtle linguistic echoes were captured and preserved not in official, deteriorating histories, but were carried forward in the rhythmic, melodic cadence of the ancient prayers whispered constantly by the keepers as they conducted their duties, ensuring that the fundamental spirit of the first builders never truly departed from their colossal stone city. The red sandstone itself served as the primary and most truthful chronicler of time, bearing the indelible, patient marks of countless windstorms and the slow, inexorable erosion caused by the ages, constantly reminding all who dwelt there of the ultimate impermanence of mortal human endeavor. Every facade, however grandly conceived and finely detailed in its execution, was known to be merely a temporary assertion against the enormous, silent patience of the mountain, a sharp reminder that empires rise and fall into dust, while the immutable rock remains steadfast. Yet, in this profoundly humbling awareness of the vast geological scale, the local keepers found a deep and essential solace, for they knew that true endurance lay not in fruitlessly resisting change, but in maintaining the essential, unbroken connection to the timeless, unchanging spirit of the place, allowing themselves to bend like the tough, flexible desert scrub rather than attempting to stand rigidly and thereby breaking like brittle marble. Yet, in this profoundly humbling awareness of the vast geological scale, the local keepers found a deep and essential solace, for they knew that true endurance lay not in fruitlessly resisting change, but in maintaining the essential, unbroken connection to the timeless, unchanging spirit of the place, allowing themselves to bend like the tough, flexible desert scrub rather than attempting to stand rigidly and thereby breaking like brittle marble. In the temporary dwellings, nestled close to the monumental treasury, the citizens of the lower city slept fitfully through the night, their dreams often troubled by the recurring memory of harsh, devastating droughts, and the constant, nagging pressures of vital trade caravans that had either failed to arrive at all or had brought unexpected political upheaval from distant lands. They lived at the mercy of the transient, unpredictable world, relying heavily upon volatile treaties and shifting markets and the temporary favor of distant, often indifferent emperors whose exotic names they could barely pronounce, tying their fortunes precariously to the fragile stability of the lengthy silk and spice roads. But for the keepers high above, their disciplined gaze fixed unswervingly upon the eternal, reliable cycle of the constellations. Such pressing worldly anxieties held very little sway, for their security was rooted not in silver or in silk, but deeply in the unyielding rock beneath their feet, and the unbroken, enduring chain of their ancestral, sacred watch. But for the keepers high above, their disciplined gaze fixed unswervingly upon the eternal, reliable cycle of the constellations. Such pressing worldly anxieties held very little sway, for their security was rooted not in silver or in silk, but deeply in the unyielding rock beneath their feet, and the unbroken, enduring chain of their ancestral, sacred watch. With the first faint wash of apricot light spilling gradually over the eastern ridges, warning the chill morning air and chasing the deepest, stubborn shadows from the canyons, the keepers initiated their quiet, ancient dawn rituals of renewal. These were ceremonies of deep gratitude, acknowledging the successful and peaceful passage of the night and requesting the mountain's continued grace and protection for the coming day, often involving the scattering of handfuls of dried, fragrant herbs or the careful offering of simple, precious water at the rough stone basins placed high upon the altar. They profoundly understood that the daily, reliable resurrection of light was the most sacred and repeatable miracle, a dependable testament to the enduring rhythm of creation, and their duty was simply to bear witness and ensure that the valley awoke not to sudden chaos, but to the gentle, disciplined order and blessing of the rising sun.